Well, good morning. You're here for the Psychology of Disruption, and I'm Dr. Jerry Lynn Hogg. I'm the director of the Media Psychology program at Fielding Graduate University, and I'm particularly interested in immersive experiences. I do some research in augmented and virtual reality, but really wanting to understand how technology influences our lives and how we use it to connect and make meaning. I have my panel members here with me today. We've got Dr. Pamela Rutledge, Dr. Karen Wylie Rappaport, and Dottie Chi. So adoption roles are kind of interesting. In 2018, 11% of the U.S. had VR headsets. In 2020, we're expected to generate $150 billion in revenue. We do know that 87% of the households have mobile phones, and a third of them have used augmented reality thanks to Pokemon Go. And I know we could argue whether it's truly augmented reality or not. But I just wanted to set the stage. I think you guys already understand that and know that this is an area of considerable interest, and we're really lucky to have these experts on the panel here to talk about it. So what we're going to do is start with introductions, and I'm going to have our panelists not only tell us a little bit about what they do with their job, but also how they're going to frame the discussion today while we're talking about the psychology of disruption. So I'll start with you, Dr. Pamela Rutledge.
Sure. Dr. Pamela Rutledge. I'm the director of the Media Psychology Research, and I'm also faculty at Fielding Graduate University. My research really focuses on consumer behavior and audience experience from a qualitative perspective. I look at the subjective meaning that audiences and consumers derive from the media that they consume, and then match that against the narratives that the brands and entertainment properties think that they're telling, to see what are the gaps, where are people making meaning, and where can they potentially lean in to bridge that gap so that the message that they're intending to tell is actually being heard. And I'm using various psychological frameworks that I won't bore you with, but I'm really looking at how this impacts identity, affiliation, core needs, including happiness, enjoyment, hedonic and both eudaimonic, which means temporary happiness or long-term happiness experience of any of these media properties that I'm looking at.
Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Wylie Rappaport. I spend my days embedded at a startup media company, and it's Canvas Worldwide. My group is called the Y Group, and what we do is exactly understand why people are doing what they're doing. So my research, my day job research, is really much about helping clients understand within this vast media landscape how to connect with their consumers. Most of our clients have large portfolios. So for instance, automotive, Kia Hyundai Motors has a tremendous amount of different vehicles that might appeal to different people who are using media in different ways. Heineken portfolio of beers and ciders, so we might have a Tecate or a Dos Equis or a Heineken. My job is, or our job is, to figure out where those people are interacting in media and what makes sense to use, as well as we have entertainment clients. So we'll be launching a movie that's very indie, and then we'll be launching a movie that's very much organized around cultural heritage, a continuation of a franchise that exists, and all of those come with media budgets that we need to match. So how I apply psychology to that big puzzle is really to understand the motivations. I found doing work that is organized around motivations helps me understand what to do now, but also gives me a best practice to take into the future. So if I understand the motivations and there's a new emerging platform, or there's a new ability on Facebook or Instagram or Snaps, then I can do a really good job of looking into the future how this particular consumer might engage with that particular media.
Hi, I'm Dottie Chi, and I have a pretty diverse background. I have a master's in international management. I've worked in corporate and I've worked in small business before, and then I started focusing on psychology. I'm doing my PhD, finishing my dissertation on the fear of death and its mitigation through immersive experiences, digital immersive experiences. I'm a mindfulness coach. I'm also a facilitator for cancer patients and survivors, and a clinical hypnotherapist. So I am really fascinated by the possibility of immersive technology for dealing with really acute problems, be it in mental health, be it environmental issues, raising awareness. It's really, I think my passion is around enhancing human nature so that we could possibly live our very best selves and in community as well.
Great. So we're here to talk about disruption. And I'd like to find out what you guys think is disruption, how you're defining it.
So we've been arguing about this all morning. So my position is, and to separate it from Christensen's model of value-add business models, is that disruption is when people are going along in a certain way and something enables them to do the same thing in a completely different way. So it really relies on people using the technology, not just the nature of the technology as potentially disruptive. So I view disruption as something that actually impacts society.
I think a lot about what people actually end up doing with the technology or the media. For instance, if we do a little brief historical, I think we would all agree that what Twitter said Twitter was going to be, to keep your friends and family apprised of what you were eating for breakfast and lunch. And people have harnessed that technology and use it in a very disruptive way. And that brings us back to people have psychological needs that they may not be completely aware of, but when a technology is given to them where they can express and satisfy those needs, they'll find a way to do it. So I always come with, okay, here's what the technology says it's going to do, but I want to really keep an eye on what people are doing. For instance, I have this. Google Glasses. I got the fashionable Diane von Furstenberg version, but the limited time that I talked to people, what they ended up doing with the glasses, based upon all the promise, was taking pictures. And we see that again and again. People just like to take pictures, and you could take a picture with a wink of an eye and walk around winking and making people think you were a little bit crazy, and then share out those pictures of exactly what you were seeing. And now we see with phones and some of the capabilities that they have now, that we can show people what we are seeing via our phones versus via our glasses.
So Karen, it's interesting that you said that, because I thought about the first time that I saw someone with their earbuds in, right, with a mobile phone, and it looked like they were talking to themselves. Now that's common nature, and we're expecting that, but that idea of winking. And also share with you, before we came in here and she showed me her glasses, I'm like, oh, cool. Are you still using them? And what did you say?
No, I'm not. But I'm thinking of getting the new spectacles. They're a much better price than this was when it came out. So,
so do you have something? I know you have something you want to add to the disruption part.
Maybe go to that first.
Okay.
This slide. For me, what was compelling about VR when I started researching, I was actually looking for a way to get to a mindful state as quickly as possible. And I don't want to say bypassing, because that's not the right thought, but essentially being the most efficient in getting to that mindful state versus, meditating for years and years and sort of getting stuck because there's all these psychological issues that are coming up. And so what is special to me about VR, because that was my answer to that, is that it is both, it's in the middle of this graph, like right there. So you can increase your absorption, you can increase your immersion, you can be active or passive. It is in itself disruptive, and that was part of our conversation this morning. So the nature of, I would say, VR, and because of that, AR, is disruptive in itself. It shifts our point of view, and therefore it is unique in that way. So learning to harness the technologies for mental health, for wellness, I think they're unique, and I think disruption has already occurred. I think it has changed our languaging. I think it's a language in itself. I think it's permeating our culture in so many different ways. And I think actually this technology has become an extension of ourselves. And I agree, yes, there are elements of the technologies that are not kept. So it's like, I think the secret sauce is kind of trying to figure out the details of it. Like, what sticks for people? Like, what do people want? What are their needs? What are their deeper needs? What are the needs that they're not even aware of? Because that happens too, right? So in focusing in that way, we can harness something that is already disruptive in a positive manner. Maybe, there's a way to make money with it too. But
So why would we even care if something's disruptive? I mean, like, do you have some ideas that, based on human nature, that we can tell if something's disruptive?
Well, why would we care? I think it's, and we were discussing this before, I think the disruption is interesting because we get so stuck in our belief systems. And then we build up, all these rigid concepts, and then we live in them. So disruption in itself is really important so that we can come out of these rigidified thought constructs and live a life that is full and interesting.
I would say, for me, disruption is something that we have traditionally seen looking backwards. The printing press, television, comic books, different things, especially when we're talking about media and technology, and we can look back in history and say, whoa, that changed the world, that changed society, it changed how we interact with each other, it really changed on a global level in many ways. And so for me right now, looking at what's disruptive gives us a chance to study those kind of changes in real time. And we might look at some things that appear to be disruptive and then just walk away from them because they don't take that interest of people that goes back to the psychology, but then other things do. And so, for instance, I look at those big milestones. So that would be the introduction of the internet, the introduction of a computer that was personal. And these are the things that I think, from my point of view, are disruptive because they change society and tend to, you can see where we have multiple decades going down a society that looks a particular way, and then this technology comes in and it shifts in some way that either creates more of an even playing field or disrupts the even playing field, creates more democracy, suppresses democracy, and those kind of things. And those are usually two tensions that are always in play.
Right, so it's basically enabling desired behavior. So another way of saying that is it's successful when reality falls short and technology can fill the gap.
Kind of interesting since we're talking about reality versus virtual, augmented, and reality. So we're really talking about adoption, right? And what kinds of things drive adoption?
Well, let me start by sort of giving you a short model of the way I look at things. People are driven by core fundamental needs. So you could say that those are archetypal needs. And what's more archetypal than a superhero? If you evaluate technology by a sort of short superhero quiz, you can make a judgment about whether or not it will fundamentally meet needs and be adopted. So, for example, does it provide magic, right? Does it imbue you with powers that you didn't already have? You know, can you get information that you couldn't see? Can you fly? Can you teleport? Can you be someplace else? So is there a magical component that extends what we can already do? The second is, do you feel like you can actually do the things that it's promising? Do you feel the power? The third is it providing a source of connection, right? Everyone wanted to love Superman, right? Crowds cheering him. Does it make you feel more connected to humanity? Does it make you feel more connected to yourself? The fourth is, does it embody some kind of transformation? Does it allow you to take something somewhere else? Does it allow you to have some kind of transformative experience, whether that's shock and awe or whether that's a change in behavior? Another thing is does it feel safe? Is it providing safety? Now, that might seem like a weird thing to talk about when you're talking about disruption and innovation, but a primary biological imperative of the human being is not to die, right? So if you have experiences that, like the little lightweight biplane, right? Why didn't that catch on? We should all have our own little biplanes and be avoiding 405 altogether. But those are scary, right? So adoption is not going to happen on things that fundamentally challenge our sense of safety. And then the final thing is social and environmental constraints. There are certain constraints that you can't work around, whether it's regulatory or sort of social norms. But I think that if you use that simple model, which, by the way, all track to environment or evolutionary theory, self-determination theory, and a bunch of other sort of boring things, you can make a judgment about whether or not these things are going to fulfill some core needs.
So I think there's a theme here. I always look to see what people are doing and then work backwards from that. So one of the recent research studies that I did was based upon the mass adoption of fitness bands and what was actually happening there. And so then using that as an example, as a case study, what we could see is there's a psychological theory about self-regulation that people have an idea. They have like a sense of agency that they want to do something, in this case, health, live longer, live as long as possible and as well as possible. And they can't move into action, or they move into action and it's temporary. And what happens with a lot of these fitness bands is because the feedback is so quick and it is about you, so I am the most interesting topic that there is in the world. And there's psychological components in that we process information about ourselves. It's more salient and more memorable about ourselves. So I go from a person who was trying to get fit and struggling and other priorities took place to a person who constantly is reminded of my goal and how I am doing towards my goal, and that makes it more salient. So McAdams has a theory that is based upon the agent, actor, and autobiographical self, which goes back to what Pam was talking about, the stories that we tell. And I could see that in play there, where the agent was able to move from an ideal to embodied action within the world based upon the psychological advantage that fitness bands gave them. And then I learned about it by them telling me the stories of what the data meant to them. And it was very interesting because people could point, to a graph with a data point, and I'm like, oh, that's when my nephew got married. And so you see, I don't have any steps there. But then this was right before I signed up for a triathlon, so you could see what's happening in my data. So it became sort of part of their narrative identity. And basically, adoption rates, I wrote it down, I think 280 million people have Fitbit, and obviously we all know it is being purchased by Google for
A lot of money.
some billions of dollars.
But it does provide transformation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a really important topic here too, and it's this idea of self-knowledge, like understanding yourself and your own way of dealing with things, or your own responses of your body, And so I think there is an inherent interest in, like, who am I? So, Geraldine, maybe you could go for like that second slide
Sure.
that I had, which also addresses, what Pam was saying. I think it all ties it together in my mind. It's based on Maslow's pyramid of needs. Only I disagreed that Maslow had a pyramid. It's actually proven that he never designed the pyramid. He designed these needs, and it was meant to be something like, it's not like that we're just dealing with one and then we go to the next one and we go higher in levels. We actually are dealing with all of these at different points in times of our lives. So it's more like a curvy thing. So I put them in a circle. And I think that that definitely adoption is supported when those needs are addressed. So Pam already spoke to some of them, which is, safety, and Karen did too, in terms of self-knowledge. That is, self-actualization and self-knowledge are probably very closely related, and self-esteem. And so when all of these factors, or one of them very strongly, is triggered by a technology, then I think it really does have a good shot at adoption. When you look at the technology, though, VR, AR, MR, and so on, it's fascinating because it depends on the use case whether there's going to be adoption or there's further adoption. In mental health, it's very interesting because you can change certain patterns by using these technologies because you're absorbed into a different point of view. But you can address all of these needs. I think, from my perspective, one of the things that is really missing at the moment is the practicality of it. In other words, the hardware. So, for example, with the Google Glass, it wasn't, from a hardware perspective, it wasn't the ideal thing. It's not how you want to walk around. When we had VR at the beginning, we had all the mobile VR. I don't know if you guys were part of that, where we would put the phone into some sort of a headset, and then we were able to view experiences through that. So I was working with cancer patients and cancer survivors with my own VR apps to mitigate anxiety. And, by the time they'd gotten all of the hardware together, they were like even
So
more
anxious.
anxious than they were at the beginning. So
Sort of defeated the purpose.
yeah, so it defeated the purpose. So sometimes we overlook, when we speak about adoption, we overlook like these really simple things, right? So if you don't have the hardware for it, it's not easy. Like, just put on the headset and now you can relax, or now you can, experience yourself, or now. But if it's too difficult, nobody's going to do it.
Right.
It's
But I
just
think you
plain and simple.
make a great point about use case, because there are some cases where VR really is disruptive. For example, treating PTSD of
Yep.
guys that have come back from Afghanistan. It's hardly appropriate to take them back to Afghanistan to do in situ behavioral treatment, which is the best way to treat that kind of thing. But you can recreate those things in VR.
Right.
So that's one case where, without question, it's been disruptive in the way treatment
absolutely.
is delivered.
So exposure therapy, is something totally accepted, except the way that's been done, right, is that you go to a center and then, you're all hooked up or tethered, that was like tethered VR. So then it's not, if we talk about adoption of a technology, then you can't go from there, because you're back in this realm of thousands of dollars for the equipment, and then you're sitting there with all of these things. Okay, that's changed with the Oculus Quest, so now we're able to get there faster, more efficiently. And exposure therapy has changed too. I saw in augmented reality, they are actually working with fear of spiders. I think it's from Oxford, where you can use your phone then, to treat the fear of spiders. So it's changing, and that's the place where it gets really interesting, which gets me to the middle of this graph, which is the connection, right? So we have the connection to self, we have the connection to others, so this is at the crux, the most important element, I think, for adoption to succeed of any technology. But the hardware has to be up to snuff, I want to say, so that you can actually use it easily, right? Phone is
So this is
great.
almost that nurture nature kind of a challenge where, is it the design, like the augmented reality or the virtual reality
Right.
or something like that, that is driving adoption? Or is it the particular use of it? For example, we're seeing great strides with both augmented and virtual reality in healthcare and in training, and maybe much slower adoptions in other areas.
Yes, exactly.
So one of the things that I'm struggling with really is we virtually all have the phones, and we can do a lot of things with augmented reality on our phone, but are those really the things that are going to be disruptive and make change? So when I think about, again, from a commercial point of view, if I'm thinking about fitness rather than health, back on fitness, it's hard to carry the phone around, like when I'm swimming laps or such. And so there does seem to be this point right now where until we get something that isn't handheld to the place that people can use it for fitness, which might be, we saw, I think, a couple weeks ago, a swim goggle that's not that different from Google Glass, but it's a swim goggle. So while you're swimming, it can give you the information about how you're doing and how your laps and your timing and your personal best, which would be very beneficial for amateur athletes as well as professional athletes. And I tried to think if there was something, you guys saw me playing with my phone earlier, like, is there something you could do with your phone that would get me to, want to go out and run and take steps and so forth? And I think there was an app sometime back that used sound and made you think that zombies were chasing you.
Zombies Run, it's on my phone.
I was going to say, did you use that, Pam?
So it felt like zombies were chasing you, and that was probably motivating for a little while, gamification.
And addressing the need of safety.
On the other, someone yesterday was talking about an app with a virtual dog that could be your companion through the new dog museum. And that made me think, well, maybe you could have a virtual dog that, ran with you and got out there, but you're still holding that phone and having to point the phone in a particular way. So
You need a fanny pack.
a fanny pack? I don't know. You still have to look through the lens to see the dog. But regardless, I think right now we're hopefully at a turning point where we will get to some other gear besides a phone that allows people to have augmented reality experiences. But a lot of what's happening right now is almost like a press pause on that, because there's a lot more success with what we can do with our phone.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also, obviously, Apple, coming out with their glasses in 2022. So that brings this whole idea of, the phone then being accessible through eyewear. And I mean, I think that's what they're going to do with that. I don't think that they're going to get, all the way out there with AR, VR possibilities on it, but that you will definitely have that then. But even with that, does that mean there's going to be mass adoption? Well,
It's still a mediated experience to some
I
extent.
think we'll see
yeah.
a lot of, try things out, fail fast. But I think there's one thing that we see on the technology side is they vastly underestimate the power of the human brain and presence. Because Zombies Run is a narrative, right? It isn't just, they do break in every so often and tell you how close the zombies are, but you listen to it continually because you're in a narrative. And the narrative is what creates the world that you visit. There was an interesting study done comparing VR movie watching to just regular flat screen TV, and there was exactly the same level of narrative transportation, sense of presence, connection with the characters, independent of the setting. The thing that made the difference was the quality of the movie and the quality of the narrative. So people were much more consumed by one movie than another movie. It didn't matter if it was VR or flat, because we have this ability to transport ourselves and our perception cognitively. You're talking on the phone to somebody that you like, and you walk right into a post, right? Because you're not here, you're there. And so I think that we're underestimating the value add sometimes of these technologies that we're already getting emotionally and cognitively. Because we were discussing last night, is VR really disruptive in gaming? Or is it just an amplification of the experience gamers are already having? They're already experiencing presence. I can tell you that my 9-year-old is in Minecraft. There's no doubt about it, right, when she's playing. So giving her VR would be entertaining for her. It would not change how much she played. It would not, well, of course, parental constraints kind of dictate that a little bit, but it wouldn't change her enjoyment in terms of the functionality that much. So I think that's an interesting question of disruption as a value add, not necessarily as money, although that's good because it's expensive stuff, but how we're thinking about the definitions.
Yeah, I think I really like, where you're heading with this too, is like this idea of the social connection. So that's the story part of it. That's the storytelling part of it, right? So we have our personal stories, and then we have our cultural stories, and how does one relate to the other? So I would say, I wrote this down. There's an emotion called kamamuta, which is an emotion evoked by sudden intensification of communal sharing. So the moment you share your personal story and it triggers other people on the other end with something similar, you have suddenly this net that happens. And that's why obviously all of these platforms are so successful, like say Facebook, Instagram, etc. Which then brings us to the other crux of adoption. It's like,
is it social?
Is it social? And then you go back exactly to what you were saying, which is the storytelling element.
Right. And the experience of other people, right?
Yeah.
Which is why people will buy a bad ticket to go see an NFL game instead of, watching it at home. Because part of it is the somatic experience of crowds.
Yeah, and that's what I really wanted to ask you guys, was about what role does cultural play in this extended reality situation? So is it individual? Is it social? Is it cultural?
Well, I'm going to argue that everything's fundamentally social. I mean, I agree with the rewiring of Maslow that without social, none of the other stuff would happen. I mean, we didn't, tackle woolly mammoths all by ourselves, right? I mean, we achieved safety through tribes, and we are a tribal people, for better or for worse. And so if they can't figure out how to make VR social, then it's going to be limited use.
Yeah, and I think, and maybe it's something as simple as, sharing what you've been doing and being able to post that. And I know that Facebook was experimenting with it, but I don't think that it was very successful. But I mean, look at the things like, Snapchat. It was so simple with the filters. I mean, there's, that's augmented reality. And then you add a story to that, and woof, all of a sudden this thing takes off, right? So that's magic. That's adoption. Right. In a consumer perspective, maybe not for what is interesting for us. I mean, for me, like say from a mental health perspective or, from a mindfulness perspective, but definitely from a mass adoption perspective, that it has to go through that.
I think that culture is really an interesting way to look at it. Things are social, things are cultural. If we look at sort of the phases we've gone through culturally simplified, we had an industrial age, we had a consumer age. I would argue now we're in the experiential age. Now, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the fact that we have all of these abilities to create experiences that is shifting the culture towards experience? When I look with my clients, we aren't really necessarily selling a car. Yes, we are selling a car. We're selling a car that's supposed to be transportation. But when we look at a portfolio of a lot of different cars, those come with an imagined experience of what you're going to be able to experience in the world. Now we see obviously augmented reality or extended reality is creating a lot of experiences. People are also very much interested in capturing those experiences and sharing them with other people, but it does go outside. Like, we can leave all the technology, we can just put it down, and we can still go on an experience, but there's this now motivation. What am I going to do this weekend? What am I going to do on my experience? What am I going to do with my money? What kind of experiences can I have versus what can I buy? So that's where I think it's a cultural shift that's resonating right now.
Do you think we're experiencing any kind of technology backlash?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going right into technology.
Well, it depends on the sector. I mean,
Right.
I think we're seeing a certain amount of technophobia, but it's mostly directed right now at social media, not VR, because not enough people have read Ready Player One.
Right. Yeah, of course, in the mental health field, there's a lot of back and forth about this. But I would say it always depends on the use case. So, can we replace human interaction? No, I don't think so. Can we replace interaction with nature? No, we can't. But if we play with these technologies in the right way, we can actually enhance our lives. I don't know. That's my that is my sort of point of view here.
I wouldn't say there's a backlash, but there's always that equal and opposite reaction. So as we go down this path with so much technology, immersed in technology, a lot of what it has us do right now is have to sit still. Sort of in homework for coming here, I went over to Century City Mall, which has changed a lot to be in a place of experience from a place to shop. But there's a mirror store, there's a Peloton store. Next door to that is a Sage, I think how you say it, where you can get aromatherapy, and then there's an Aesop's, and then there's places where you can get your own juice and all different kinds of ice cream, so all these different experiences. But it does seem that there is a desire for people to have something where they set the technology down, where they cook with fresh ingredients, where they, have aromatherapy, where they get a massage, those kind of things. And I feel like that's also coming forward, whether that is because it's part of the cultural zeitgeist or if it's as a bit of a balancing act with all the technology.
Well, so I agree. So I wouldn't call it backlash. I would call it like maybe it's the creation of more awareness around just the simple fact that there's certain things that, technology is a tool. Like, what are we going to use it for? That's up to us, right? So we can set the intention and we can, really be purposeful about it. Does it replace everything else? No, but as we accelerate in everything, right? Like you were saying, then there is sort of a thirst for the other things too. So I wouldn't call it a backlash, but I would definitely call it, that there's a self-awareness that's raised around these things are important too. Hey, I want to be in a nice place. I want to smell nice things. I want to hang out with my family. I want to go in nature.
Well, I would argue that part of the change at the Century City Mall is due to a disruptive technology called Amazon. Because...
But they even have a little Amazon store there at Century City.
But,
Just saying.
Well, and they may well, but I don't know if you've noticed it, but the stores don't stock as much as they used to. They expect you to buy online, which means that that Central Mall is full of the only things that Amazon can't sell, right? It can't sell ice cream. It can't sell massages yet, right? So there's
That's interesting.
so there's
Yes.
also a shift that's due to a disruptive
But
technology.
isn't this getting back to what Karen was talking about, looking for the experience? So all of these things that were, the stores that she was talking about is where you're smelling
Well,
things.
sure,
and you're
yeah,
having- so
but-
you're having the experience, and then you can go buy it online.
Right, no,
like you
I'm
said,
just,
but yeah.
I'm just arguing that we, as part of that equation, I mean, I agree with you, but part of the equation, we have to say what other pressures would make those things more viable as stores these days than they used to be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, in Century City, disposable income helps too, but,
No, and who knows? I mean, maybe from that perspective, the disruption was exactly being able to, order everything, and then the malls becoming, or these types of places becoming experiential places,
Recreational.
period, where you can just try out the stuff and you just order it online afterwards. So, I mean, but I'd say like we're in a huge societal shift, and we're in a disruptive phase. So, it's almost like what is going to be adopted?
Right.
We're in the middle of it. So who knows how this whole story is going to
but
end
I
up?
think, yeah, the how it's all going to end is exactly what Karen was talking about, which is that if you understand the human fundamentals and you understand the needs, then you're in a much better position to anticipate potential uses and to make judgments about what's going to satisfy needs and what can be successful.
Well, that leads exactly into my final question, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions as well. But really, what do you guys see as the future for extended reality? And is it going to go the way of the movie pass, or do we have something fabulous waiting for us?
I hope we have something fabulous
so,
waiting
too.
for us. I'm very excited about all the potential, and I do think that if we keep going back to, I guess, not putting things out there and waiting to see what happens, but watching what happens and making sort of iterative moves in real time, so that when people demonstrate for us what is motivating them to use whatever offering that we have, whether it is something for improving their personal fitness, or if it's pure entertainment and transportation, they'll show us what about the new technology is going to really have more momentum with society. It's up to us to pay attention to that and make the changes, and not just one and done. I think most of us know that, but not everyone knows that. So I definitely see situations where, we tried that augmented reality thing once and we didn't get a return on our investment, so we're moving on to something else. And that's really, when you're looking bigger picture of where all this funding is going to come from, something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think that, underlines the importance of user experience research, with everything. So then we go into the details of it, not just the mass adoption or the general theme of disruption, but rather, really pinpointing what exactly is it about this that works, what exactly is it about this that's transformative or not, where does it egg on, where does it get too difficult. I mean, when I started with the VR, I didn't know that it was going to be difficult stop at the point where people were putting in, the phones into the headsets and increasing anxiety. So that's like such a simple example of user experience research, where you just go like, yeah, ooh, that won't work. So what now? And now working with grief, for example, an investigator in a study on grief and using virtual reality and comparing it with another immersive experience that's non-digital, and just seeing how people are reacting to that in the little details, like what works. Like, you can sit down, I'm in this chair, I can relax, but then there's the tethered stuff. Okay, so how do I deal with that? And user experience, so how can I get their attention away from that and design it in such a manner that they get fully, optimally absorbed into this experience so that they can connect to their own grief. So I'm really into contemplative experiences, so it's a little bit different. But again, yes, I think that to user experience research is going to be the point.
Yeah, I would argue that positive development is going to rest on one thing. If they start to design technology where they don't just focus on what can this do, but they say, what do people want to do? What does this do? And is this helping this? Because like your example with Snapchat, what do people want to do? They want to connect, right? Fundamental human drive, right? So it doesn't take a genius to figure out that something that is easy, that allows people to connect, is going to be adopted, right? And so if they start looking at that sweet spot between the technology and the lowering friction and core needs, core drives, what people want to do, go back to the superhero quiz, right? That they will be much better able to predict successful technology.
Well, thank you. I'd like to open it up to you and any questions out there for our panel. Yes, go ahead.
I apologize, I just walked in, so I don't know if you discussed this, but in your research, are you studying the addiction factor where the neural pathways are creating same response as heroin or cocaine?
Dopamine, yeah. I don't know. Are you guys? Well, yes, of course, you know. There is a very strong element. I mean, I'm just focused on taking that mechanism and using it the other way around. So what if you have a shot of dopamine every time you get into a contemplative experience and you're more connected to self, right? So that's an interesting discussion. Does that make it inherently like an iffy thing, ethically? Like, you know, or does it give you the chance to then, as you experience yourself more, you become like meta-aware, then does that mean that there is no possibility there for addiction? But it exists.
Or to use the technology to reverse engineer what's been engineered already?
That's essentially what I'm saying. Yes, Ann. So
I would
yeah.
definitely say in the work that I did on adoption of fitness band, and people, in a good way, were addicted to the feedback that they were getting from their data. And you could see that it could very easily cross the line.
Yep.
So there are people who maybe have a propensity for an eating disorder or something like that, where your personal best is 10,000 steps a day, and the next day you do 15, and the next day you do 20, and the next day, you know, you walk all day. So those are all things that we need to keep in mind of those people who are vulnerable to addiction, whether it is in gaming or something that seems to be as positive as a fitness band. I think the good news is that we know how to harness that for good, and then hopefully that helps us. And I know some of our cohort has worked specifically in that area.
Another question. Yes.
As not to get too Orwellian, but you know, there's the big brother theory, right? But a worse one is the distraction. That technology and everything is being pushed on us so much distraction, and it'll continue. So what if you guys have thoughts about that from a technological experience? But everything is bombarded, and God forbid children being born now, the world they're going to go into. So the big brother theory is not as horrific as a distraction.
Well, I mean, sure, absolutely, but that's why I think that it's really necessary to bring out more and more contemplative experiences within the technology and to be able to manage it. I mean, there's an organization up in Silicon Valley, I think they're called CHP, Conscious Technology. Anyways, they design things so that and they work with Google and so on, and Apple came up with, under this structure, with a way to turn off your phone. Like, I don't know, but I have that on mine, right? So like you say, like silence it from this time to this time. And then what if you can also manage the amount of emails that are coming in and how you want them to come in at certain points in time. So at this, yes to contemplative, yes to managing the technology. And I think that's all possible, but it's our intention with it, right?
And I want to argue the other side of that, because the one thing that we've done is that we've got this new technology, and it's all relatively new, right? I mean, we're definitely at the shiny penny stage on a lot of this stuff, right? We all just jumped into the pool, and these kids that you're talking about, have we talked about teaching media literacy? Have we talked about teaching self-regulation? Because you can set the phone to go off, but the next app that they come to, that's not set with your parental control. So we need to be teaching self-regulation. We need to be teaching media literacy so that they understand the algorithms, the things that they're being shown, how the brain reacts, because that's the only way that we arm a generation to deal with technology and make smart choices.
And I want to jump in there. One other thing is, we evolve as humans. If you took all of the cell phones, computers, technology out of this room right now, we would still be bombarded with a lot of information. And yet you've still managed to at least semi-pay attention to what's going on here. I mean, there have been people talking out there, there's been things rolling, we've got hums and sounds, we've got lights and things. As human beings, we've evolved to be able to understand. And so we also have to think about that piece of it. I think what Pam's saying about control is so important in being able to teach people how to navigate it and get the tools to be able to navigate it, but also have belief in us as human beings in our evolution about how right now it's new, so we're still navigating it, but we'll find a way to be able to move through it.
Yeah, I don't like to think of us as passive victims, like, the silver bullet theory and all that. I like to think of us as engaging with the technology, figuring it out, and wrestling it to the ground.
So I do want to take more questions. I'm fine with you, but if somebody else had one first, since you've already asked one. Yes, go ahead.
So this is an AR, VR conversation, correct? In terms of that technology involved in the wellness industry? Is that what the panel?
Yeah.
We weren't talking about just wellness, but wellness is definitely one of those areas, as well as the whole medical industry. It's being used quite a bit.
General, bar for what a healthy human being looks like in your industry. Is there something that you're striving towards getting your clients to? Or are you just basically focused on the problem, not necessarily an ideal?
Well, I mean, I think we'll all have a really different answer to that one. I don't know. Coming out of mindfulness, I'm looking to true nature and of the person, the personal true nature, and finding that and connecting in a way that is respectful of diversity. That's my end, but
So create programming that actually helps people in the AR, augmented reality. I mean, what does that mean? Like, I can just push a button and I can have my therapist appear before me?
I don't think wellness is necessarily about therapy. I think what we're looking for is how can these things be used in a socially responsible way that have various use cases. If you're a therapist, somebody comes in and you don't say, well, take this test and I'm going to get you from a 7 to an 8, right? Basically, you want to say, how is your life? What's going on with it? And what is it that you want to change, right? These tools then become tools. Right? Facilitators for you to make a choice about what you want to change and improve.
Well, as you said, if there's not an objective sense of where you're all going, how are you going to create programming that addresses the universal principles that human beings run on?
You don't.
And to clarify, we're psychologists who are studying what's happening in health and fitness and sports and so forth. So we're
no, I'm making it.
She is making it. I'm sorry, but we're coming from a psychology point of view, not from a manufacturer's point of view. So looking at human behavior, how the mind works, what is motivating people for particular behaviors, and what we can learn from that to take back out into the world to share with the people who are makers, so that they can do more good than evil with what they make.
So I think that you're addressing a question. I mean, there's so many ideas. We could sit down and literally, over 2 hours, maybe crank out some of them on how to do this. So that's huge, right? I mean, it's. I mean, at least 2 hours, right? Or days,
I have
or
a feeling
whatever,
we'll be
yeah?
talking about it out there. We're near the end. Go ahead. We have one last question, and then we'll.
To kind of piggyback on that, Jim, and you and Pam probably could talk about positive psychology, things we've learned about positive psychology and how that can be implemented.
Right. So both Pam and I do research and teach in positive media psychology, and my approach is always a strength-based. Well, let's look at what's working well. That doesn't mean be Pollyannish and pretend like the nefarious things aren't out there, but I try to lead as a strength-based. But I'll let Pam talk a little bit about it as well.
But no, I think that, that's right, that we were in the last, it's been about 40 years now, identifying constructs so that we're not just looking at pathologies, we're looking also at what works and trying to figure out how to enable people to make choices to improve their level of happiness, flourishing, competence, resilience. And so positive psychology isn't all about happy people wandering around, although that would be swell. It's really about building strengths so that you can overcome life's challenges, so that you're not sidelined by things, so that you can achieve your goals. So part of your question is the first step in therapy is to identify the client's goals, right? And so it's a goal-based problem. It isn't a uniform program.
We're down to our final minute. I didn't know if the panel, if anybody wanted to have one very quick, brief word.
Oh, I thought we already did that.
I think we did it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just had one thing that I thought was interesting. Virtual reality is retro, in my opinion, because I don't believe it's disruptive. It's actually bringing us back to reality. So anyway, thanks for joining us.
Nice.